Hi, and welcome to Why Do Countries Exist, an episode on Indonesian political parties. So today's episode was requested by Sam Volkers and Ken Channel on YouTube. If you want me to do another country's political parties, please either comment it down below, send me an email, send me a message on Patreon for my patrons, shout out to them and especially Danny Brown by the way, or put a request in the feedback and request forum in the description. I currently have requests to do Argentine parties, Iranian parties, Armenian parties, Mexican parties, Iraqi parties, Singaporean parties, Swedish parties, Czech parties, Finnish parties, Norwegian parties, and many more. Indonesia's party system is fascinating. It is both a country with high levels of political polarization between secularist voters and Islamists, but also a very cooperative environment among political elites, and with a lot of voters unified around certain attitudes in the country's politics. It is on one hand a democracy with, for the most part, free and fair elections, yet also under a fairly authoritarian political framework and culture. It is a country with defined political parties representing unique ideological blocs, and yet also, at the same time, with parties who don't really stand for anything at all. It really is unique in the world, and unlike many other party systems we have talked about, there isn't really any good one-to-one comparisons with another country's party systems. As a brief history lesson, Indonesia, after gaining independence, would briefly have a liberal democracy headed by the country's first president, Sukarno, with a whole host of parties contesting elections. Sukarno would, in 1959, end this period bringing about the guided democracy period, which saw no elections, but the government attempted to appease many different groups at once, with groups integrated to various degrees within the government. This would end in 1967, when the General Suharto overthrew Sukarno and brought about the New Order period in Indonesia, which was characterized by an authoritarian system that was radically anti-communist, violent, and saw Indonesia invade East Timor, but also was stable and saw many changes for the country. Importantly for party politics, it was dominated by the main party, Golkar, and two satellite parties. Then, in 1998, the New Order came crashing down due to economic tension, riots, and looting, which led to the current Indonesian political system that is democratic with multi-party elections. However, one important caveat for the system is all parties have to support a belief in Pancasila and support the 1945 Constitution. Pancasila is like a national ideology for the country, developed during the 50s and today has 5 principles. 1. Belief in one God, although it's actually interpreted that so long as you are Muslim, Protestant, Catholic, Hindu, or Confucian, you are following the first principle. 2. Quote, just and civilized humanity. 3. Indonesian unity. 4. Democracy under a representative system. And 5. Social justice for all. Pancasila is somewhat vague, and so people can have a lot of interpretations on what all the 5 principles mean, but generally, Pancasila seems to represent for a lot of people a unity among the many different people of Indonesia, and it allows parties who are on paper seem like they should probably be rivals actually come together and work in government, with grand coalitions of many different rivaling parties as a norm in Indonesia. So let's start looking at the legislature. The lower house is the House of Representatives, which is made up of 580 representatives who are elected via proportional representation from 84 districts found throughout the country. Each district will send a different number of representatives based on the population of the district, with some sending 10 representatives, while others send only 3. In order to win a seat in the House of Representatives, a party needs to win at least 4% of the vote. The House of Representatives is the main legislative body, creating rules and regulations and passing the budget. The upper house is the House of Councilors. The House of Councilors is made up of 154 councilors who are elected from the 38 provinces of Indonesia. Each province sends 4 senators who are elected from a single transferable vote. Candidates are officially nonpartisan, so it's not going to be as focused on this episode. The House of Councilors' job is to serve as an advisory role, recommending policies and bills to be passed to the House of Representatives, but can't actually stop or independently make any new laws, requiring support from the House of Representatives. Ultimately, the legislature is weaker compared to the president, who is the main political figure in the country. And finally, Indonesia very recently had an election for president, the House of Representatives, the House of Councilors, and also some regional seats. At this point, the election is over and a new president has been elected, but it also seems the status quo will remain for the most part, and the reformers associated with the last president will continue to control the country, or at the very least play a very important role leading the country. Speaking of the ex-president, we have the Indonesian Democratic Party of Struggle, or Parti Demokrasi Indonesia Perjuangan, or PDI-P. The PDI-P can trace its origins to Sukarno's party, the Indonesian National Party, which embraced a sort of mix of nationalist and somewhat left-wing proposals/attitudes. In 1973, the National Party was forcefully merged with 4 other non-Islamic parties into the Indonesian Democratic Party, which served as a loud opposition during the New Order. In the late 90s, it began to transform as Megawati Soekarno Putri, the daughter of Sukarno, took over the party and began to more earnestly protest against the government. After the fall of the New Order, the PDI-P was founded, serving as a party for several different blocs. It was for Megawati and her supporters, with it often harkening back to Sukarno. It was/is a quasi-left-wing party, with it often taking a populist message, arguing for more support for the poor, although the traditional Western left-right divide isn't really a great way to view Indonesian politics. It also is seen as a strongly pro-secularist party, with it serving as a counterweight to more Islamic or religious-oriented parties. So the party's support base is seen as a combination of poorer Indonesians enticed by the party's promises for the poor, minorities such as Hindus, Christians, or Chinese sympathetic to the secular messaging of the party, and gets the most support in Eastern Java, Bali, and the interior of Kalimantan. Megawati managed to actually get put into the position of president in 2001 after the current president was removed, but she lost power in the 2004 presidential election. The PDI-P would return to the presidential position in 2014 when Joko Widodo was elected as president, with both the PDI-P's traditional supporters along with Jokowi's immense popularity propelling him and the party to victory in 2014 and 2019. This latest election, Jokowi's son backed the winner of the presidential election, Prabowo Subianto, serving as his vice presidential candidate, so Jokowi is seen as partially responsible for their victory. The PDI-P itself nominated Ganjar Pranowo as their presidential candidate, but he lost, getting only 16% of the vote. The PDI-P remains the largest party in the legislature, but isn't going to be as powerful as it was in Jokowi's days. The party won 110 representatives. Megawati is the current party leader. The PDI-P's biggest defining feature is its commitment to secularism and its nationalist ideology. It opposes theocratic or Islamic rule, and is seen as opposing racism in the country. It's seen as a populist party with its economic proposals, especially when out of office, arguing for more government investment into the economy and welfare, supporting more development and infrastructure projects in the country, and on its website talks about how it should be, quote, a tool of struggle to oppose all forms of individualism and to revive the struggle and spirit of mutual assistance in the life of society, nation, and state. Admittedly, Google Translate probably isn't helping the quote a whole lot, but I think it's trying to say it opposes the atomization of society and supports a more communal model. It also has historically fought for anti-corruption reform and was seen as a leading voice against military rule and the old guard. However, the PDI-P has, as the years have gone on, worked increasingly with those elements of the old guard. The PDI-P in the 2019 election worked with the party of the New Order, Golkar, and after the election, Jokowi appointed New Order general and presidential candidate rival Prabowo as Minister of Defense. Admittedly, this kind of grand coalition and power sharing among elites is very common and a norm in Indonesia, but it still might set those off who oppose the old system. It also doesn't help that Jokowi's administration saw increasing democratic backsliding as several different protests over a revised criminal code, racism against Papuans, and constitutional changes that allowed Jokowi's son to run for vice president, which was seen by many as a form of nepotism, saw strong police crackdowns and arrest of opposition activists. The PDI-P has ultimately seen a lot of infighting between its various different wings, as some wings are more loyal to Jokowi, while others are more loyal to other figures in the party like Megawati and Ganjar. Some wings are more leftist and populist, while others are more moderate and pragmatic. This all makes it very difficult to ensure party unity. This has expressed itself in this latest election, with the PDI-P nominating Ganjar, and yet many within the party instead broke ranks to vote for another candidate. If the party continues to see infighting over what the party should be, it could see large-scale defections or fall into irrelevancy. It also, due to its strong association with the secular camp, is seen by more religious Muslims as hostile towards Islam. Finally, while Jokowi ended his term widely liked, there was some criticism of him moving away from his man of the people message, Indonesia's more authoritarian turn during his reign, and failure to fully transform the nation under his rule. Also, Jokowi was semi-famously a fan of metal music and went to several metal concerts while he was governor. I had mentioned them a couple times previously, so let's talk about the Party of Functional Groups, or Parti Golongan Karya, or Golkar. Golkar was originally founded in the Guided Democracy period as a party serving the interests of the military. Then, in the New Order period, it emerged as the dominant political party under the control of Suharto. It was seen in those days as a far-right party embracing an anti-communist, pro-American, pro-business, authoritarian model for Indonesia. After the New Order, it rebranded itself as a conservative, secular, pro-liberalization, pro-business party, which has been able to position itself as a powerful player in every government since the 90s. Its support base seems to be a combination of those supportive of liberalization, scattered communities found generally outside of Java, particularly in Sulawesi and the Malukus, and to a lesser extent among ex-Suharto supporters. It, in the latest election, backed Prabowo for the presidency. It won 102 representatives. It is currently headed by Airlangga Hartarto, the former Minister of Industry and coordinating Minister of Economic Affairs. While I wasn't able to get to Golkar's website due to it not connecting for some reason, my understanding of the party's policies is it generally favors a center-right economic policy and is pro-status quo. It supports economic liberalization and believes a good and friendly business environment will lead to further development in the country. Since it has played a role in every government in the country since the fall of Suharto, it presents itself as a technocratic party, with its members having the experience to run the country. It generally isn't a party that is strongly ideological and isn't really going to push for any dramatic or sweeping reforms to the system. It also is seen as mostly opposing radical Islamist groups, aligning with the secular camp, and also has a kind of apologist position towards Suharto. This apologist position also betrays that the party, while not entirely based around it, is a party that is deeply interconnected with Suharto apologists. And many cronies/family members of cronies of the Suharto days continue to play a role in the party. The New Order period of Indonesia saw widespread corruption by Suharto and his allies that led to billions of dollars being stolen from the country and saw somewhere around 500,000 killed in anti-communist and anti-leftist purges. And yet, despite massive protests in the late 90s that saw the regime fell, many members of Suharto's regime never faced justice and continue to play some role influencing the country, primarily, although not entirely, in the Golkar party. It has been accused of a lot of internal infighting and corruption, which has led to several other parties we will talk about later being formed, all breakoffs of Golkar. It has also worked with every government since the fall of Suharto, so it's seen as not really having a firm ideology and standing just for nothing. Admittedly, the same can be said for almost all Indonesian parties, but it does feel a little bit more noticeable with Golkar. It is a pro-status quo party, and so for Indonesians who believe some level of reform is needed or who are critical of Suharto's rule, it is seen as a party representing the worst of the system. One of these parties that was formed as a breakoff of Golkar is the Great Indonesia Movement, or Gerakan Indonesia Raya, or Gerindra. Gerindra was formed in 2008 and came to serve as a political vehicle for the head of the party, Prabowo Subianto, who I've referenced at a couple different points throughout the episode. Prabowo, briefly before he entered into electoral politics, was a general and son-in-law to Suharto, and during the protests against Suharto in 1998, he allegedly kidnapped and killed several protesters. Afterwards, he entered politics, involving himself in Golkar before founding Gerindra. Prabowo would present himself and his movement as a right-wing nationalist movement. He would run in 2014 and 2019 against Jokowi, presenting himself as an almost soft Islamist. He would then shift his tone this election in 2024 after having spent the last 5 years as Jokowi's Minister of Defense and presenting himself as an ally of Jokowi and as someone who would carry on his legacy, which ultimately helped him win the election with almost 60% of the vote. The party got the most support in 2019 in Western Java and parts of Western Sumatra. However, in this latest election, it picked up a lot of support among Jokowi supporters, particularly in Eastern Java, the east of the country, younger voters, and minorities. It overall serves as both Prabowo's and right-wing nationalist political vehicle. It won 86 representatives. It and Prabowo's policies are generally right-leaning. It's a bit hard to figure out exactly what they stand for due to the big tent nature of Indonesian politics, Prabowo changing his messaging between the 2019 and 2024 campaign, and the party's website being very vague. But generally they favor a mixed economy, socially conservative policies, and are hostile towards the West. Prabowo has called for free lunch for all schoolchildren, wanted to prevent raw natural materials from leaving the country, instead wanting them to remain in the country, and broadly favors protectionism and nationalization over free trade and privatization. Prabowo has supported a strong military, is hostile towards LGBTQ rights, is secular but also worked fairly regularly with Islamist groups, and Gerindra's party members were involved in anti-immigrant riots in late 2023. Prabowo has also called for Indonesia to move away from the US and align more with Russia and China. Prabowo also previously had taken steps as Minister of Defense to move Indonesia closer towards Israel, although starting in late 2023, he revoked this position. Prabowo won the presidential race pretty handily, but that doesn't mean all Indonesians are happy with his election. Several small protests have taken place protesting his ascension to the presidency, with people largely complaining about his past as a New Order military general who has been widely accused by human rights organizations of being at least partially responsible for the kidnapping and death of several pro-democracy activists. He has denied all of this, but he is still viewed, by some at the very least, as a very dangerous person and a war criminal. It also doesn't help that in the last two presidential elections, in 2014 and 2019, he declared himself as the winner before the official results were finalized, and then claimed the vote was rigged, leading to protests in the streets by his supporters until he finally conceded and got a ministerial job. This all makes him appear as someone who is willing to do or say anything to gain power. While his image has been significantly improved due to his campaigning this year, trying to make him appear far more like a silly old grandpa and Jokowi support, he is still viewed by a decent chunk of the country, and especially in the foreign press, as a demagogue and or someone who doesn't actually hold strong convictions besides retaining his own power. I've been mainly talking about Prabowo because without Prabowo, there really wouldn't be a whole lot to talk about with the party. Prabowo is by far the most recognizable member of the party, and without him, it's skeptical how relevant the party would be. Now, despite all this, Prabowo, partially because of his rebranding, Jokowi support, his nationalistic messaging, and because it seems like a lot of the foreign media has a critical view of Prabowo, so he's seen as standing up for Indonesia against foreign influences, he is still popular and will have a very important 5-year term to influence the country. We have another Golkar breakoff with the National Democratic Party, or NasDem Party. NasDem was founded in 2011 by several media personalities, most prominently Surya Paloh, a longtime member within Golkar and powerful media tycoon, owning several newspapers and the TV channel Metro TV. Paloh officially took over in 2013, which he has retained ever since, presenting it as a new secular party. While it isn't massive, it has seen sizable growth, getting between 5 to 10% of the vote every election. While it is a secular party, it actually ended up backing Anies Baswedan, the former governor of Jakarta, who is supported by the religious bloc of Indonesian politics for the presidential race. It gets the most support generally in the east, in Sulawesi and Papua. It won 69 representatives. NasDem's website was down, but it seems to be generally a secular party like Golkar, and due to the fact that it is a part of the Progressive Alliance International, it's maybe center-left leaning. NasDem is really based around Paloh. While formed from several different personalities, within a couple years they were all driven out due to Paloh adopting a very dictatorial style of running the party, which he still maintains. NasDem isn't dying, but when Paloh eventually steps away from politics, it does mean NasDem will likely disappear or have to be massively overhauled. The party has also suffered with accusations of corruption and of being artificially inflated due to Paloh using his media resources to promote the party and give it disproportional coverage. Let's move away from the secularist and move to the more religiously oriented parties. The largest of these parties is the National Awakening Party, or Partai Kebangkitan Bangsa, or PKB. The PKB was founded in 1998 after the fall of Suharto, serving as the de facto political wing of the Nahdlatul Ulama organization, an Islamic reform organization embracing what has been called traditional Islam in Indonesia, which is a pluralistic, moderate form of Islam, supporting a more communal/syncretic-based understanding of Islam. PKB member Abdurrahman Wahid was elected as president in 1999, but had to cut his term short in 2001 due to political pressure from rivaling factions within the party. It suffered a pretty serious drop in support in the mid-2000s due to reasons we'll talk about a bit later, but has seen a minor revival. Its support base is generally found in central and eastern Java, where Nahdlatul Ulama is dominant, with smaller pockets of support in Aceh and Kalimantan. It also does better among more educated, rural, and/or older voters. In the latest election, it backed Anies. The party won 68 representatives. It is headed by Muhaimin Iskandar, a representative who is also Anies' running mate for the presidency. The PKB, while it isn't an Islamist-influenced party, still supports a pluralistic Indonesia. It opposes an explicitly Islamic state. The PKB is a party that is very decentralized, with its high-profile members often pulling the party in different directions, some more socially conservative and others more moderate. Some favoring aligning more with the secular bloc and others aligning more with the Islamist bloc. Anies, while not a member of the party, was endorsed by them, is seemingly closely aligned with them, and his campaign has argued for progressive taxes, reducing inequality, opposing the project to build the new planned capital city of Nusantara, wants to do more to help Rohingya refugees, and having a more proactive foreign policy. The PKB is the largest Islamist party, but it doesn't seem to be a very unified group. While yes, factionalism and a somewhat hazy ideology are very much par for the course for Indonesian politics, the PKB was almost entirely consumed by it. Starting in 2001 when Wahadi was removed, its rivaling camps started fighting each other, resulting in it dropping down from the third most voted for party in parliamentary elections in 2004 to the seventh most voted for party in the 2009 elections, with less than 5% of the vote. Efforts in the 2010s to bridge the gap have actually been somewhat successful, and the party has seen steady growth over the years. However, it still remains a party with very little actual ideology, mostly based around several high-profile politicians within the party and supported by Nahdlatul Ulama-aligned Muslims and very few else. It is a part of the Islamic bloc, but it is also so moderate I can see many more devoutly Islamist Indonesians viewing it as not even Islamist. It isn't a powerful position in the country's politics, but also isn't a party I see as becoming a dominant force like the PDI-P or Gerindra anytime soon. A more devoutly Islamist party is the Prosperous Justice Party, or Partai Keadilan Sejahtera, or PKS. The PKS can trace its origins to Islamist student organizations in the country's universities that started to emerge in the 80s. The PKS proper was formed in the late 90s and came to represent a new, more Middle Eastern influence and literal style of Islam. It, while not an out-and-out fundamentalist party, it officially being a party embracing Pancasila, is seen as probably the most religious and conservative party in the House of Representatives, and is a major counterweight to the secular parties like the PDI-P. It generally tends to do best in areas with a large and very religious Muslim community. In particular, Aceh. It backed Anies for the presidency. It won 53 representatives. It is headed by Ahmed Shaimu, a representative. The PKS opposes a fully secular society, wants to reform the government, and supports other Islamist movements throughout the world. It opposes a strictly secular society, wanting some form of Sharia law to be codified, wants to ban pornography, and supports capital punishment for those that sell drugs. It is very anti-corruption, wanting to clean up the bureaucracy, while also supporting more relief to help the poor. It supports groups like the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, the AKP in Turkey, and Hamas in Palestine, with it being very pro-Palestinian and hostile towards the US. The PKS is probably the most radical party in Indonesia, at the very least in the House of Representatives, and the one with the most definitive ideology. This makes it one of the more polarizing parties in the country, with many opponents of the party accusing it of being a hateful Wahhabist party that clashes with many people's interpretation of Pancasila. Pre-2019, this was more on display, as it spent the 2014 and 2019 election accusing Jokowi and other secularists of being secretly Chinese and of trying to stamp out Islam in the country. The PKS and its radical Islamism was seen as just being too toxic for many, and the party was forced to moderate its messaging this campaign, partially to better fit the message of Anies, and also to avoid the state cracking down on them. While initially it rose to popularity on an anti-corruption platform, it also has been involved in several corruption cases, most notably in 2013 when several members of the PKS were found guilty of bribery, with one caught paying a college student for sex. This just makes the PKS appear as a party that campaigns as radicals, but doesn't actually have a moral backbone when it comes to governing. The last Islamic-focused party is the National Mandate Party, or Partai Amanat Nasional, or PAN. PAN is similar to the PKB, both being moderate Islamist-based parties founded in 1998 from reformers after the fall of Suharto. However, where the PKB is affiliated with Nahdlatul Ulama, PAN is affiliated with the Muhammadiyah Society, which embraces modernist Islam, which supports a more individualist interpretation of the Quran. This is important theologically, but it also, in terms of political profile, isn't radically different from the PKB. Maybe the biggest difference is just that while the PKB is more geographically centered in Java and is more Muslim-based, PAN is more geographically spread out throughout the country, although still with more support in the east of the country, along with parts of Sumatra, southern Sulawesi, and the interior of Papua, with its success coming from the limited Christian support it receives due to its pluralistic message. It backed Prabowo for the presidency. It won 48 representatives. It is headed by Zulkifli Hasan, the former Minister of Trade and a representative. PAN's policies are a little firmer than the PKB, it seems, with it having an actual platform section on their website. It supports a pluralistic Indonesia, supports more government transparency, wants to rein in a little bit of the power of the military, supports a welfare state, wants stronger antitrust laws, and supports agrarian reform. But PAN is like the PKB in that more devout Muslims may feel the party is too moderate and therefore choose to support more principled parties like the PKS or even the PKB, seeing as the PKB is almost entirely supported by Muslims and is seen as slightly more devout than PAN, which has Christians within its support base. The party has also been accused of corruption and infighting, with infighting so bad that in the 2020 party's conference, members broke out into pushing and throwing chairs at each other. While the party isn't going to disappear anytime soon, with its support base remarkably stable, getting between 6 to 8% of the vote every election, it is unlikely to rise and become a dominant player anytime soon, and actually was out of all the parties that got seats in the House of Representatives, was the one that got the least votes. Finally, the last party with a presence in the House of Representatives is the Democratic Party, or Partai Demokrat. The Democrats were formed in 2001 from supporters of Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, a former army general and minister. Yudhoyono won the 2004 presidential election, the first direct presidential election since the fall of Suharto. Yudhoyono would then win a second term in the 2009 election, resulting in him and his party to dominate Indonesian politics in the 2000s and early 2010s. However, once Yudhoyono's 2 terms were up, the party quickly lost a lot of its base, and while it does still play a role in Indonesian politics, it is a lot more limited. It continues to serve as a party for Yudhoyono and his family, with his sons now running the party. Its support base is seen as a combination of middle-class reformers and academics of the 2000s, and geographically mostly found in urban areas and parts of Sumatra and Java. It has for the past 3 elections backed Prabowo for the presidency. It won 44 representatives. It is headed by Agus Harimurti Yudhoyono, President Susilo Yudhoyono's son and former Minister of Agrarian Affairs and Spatial Planning. The Democrats tend to get defined as a centrist and vaguely center-right party. It, while in charge, supported economic liberalization, a laissez-faire approach to companies and big businesses, a pluralistic Indonesia, supported a push towards a more liberal Indonesia, and at least initially tried to crack down on corruption. Yudhoyono's main achievements as president were ending the insurgency in Aceh, growing the Indonesian economy, and increasing Indonesia's presence on the world stage. However, this doesn't mean that Yudhoyono is well loved. While he started off his first and second term with a lot of optimism behind his rule, several scandals and policy failures ended up hurting his image. While Indonesia was growing in economic strength, it didn't put all of that to use and failed to invest it more in infrastructure, health, education, or the environment, which Yudhoyono tried and failed to champion. Corruption, division within his cabinet, and maybe more importantly, his inability to make hard or tough choices meant he appeared weak and not really like a leader. This has ultimately led to the Democrat Party to lose a lot of its influence, as once Yudhoyono left office, the party's main high-profile member left, and the party quickly went from over 20% of the parliamentary vote in 2009 to a little over 10% in 2014 to today with a little less than 7.5% of the vote and the smallest party in the House of Representatives. It's not entirely dead, but it is the future of many other Indonesian parties based mostly around one central figure. Important when that one figure is around, but once that figure is gone, it will be exiled to the sidelines. So those are all the parties in the House of Representatives. However, I'll just take a second and look at some other parties that are at least somewhat notable outside the House of Representatives. First, we have the United Development Party, or PPP, a conservative Islamist party that can trace its origins to the New Order, serving as a loud opposition similar to the PDI-P in those days. With the advent of democracy, it has continued to have some influence in the country, although election on election it has lost votes, until eventually, with this latest election, when it just barely missed the 4% parliamentary threshold. However, it does still have a decent number of local and regional politicians, and played a role supporting Ganjar for the presidency. 2 other pro-Ganjar parties were the Perindo Party, a party based around former NasDem member and Trump affiliate/copycat Heri Tanusumibjo, and the Hanura Party, which was made up of ex-Golkar members and had a strong minority support base and formerly had a presence in the House of Representatives from 2009 to 2019. Both parties do have some members in local and regional governments, but are very much on the sidelines. Ania's support base of Muslims was aided by the support of the Aceh Abode Party, or PDA, Aceh, an autonomous region of Indonesia with a strong Islamic presence, and also had a large-scale insurgency in the late 20th century, regionalist party. But the strongest party in Aceh actually backed Prabowo, the Aceh Party, a party made up of ex-insurgents. Another pro-Prabowo party was the Indonesian Solidarity Movement, or PSI, a social democratic party headed by one of Jokowi's sons. Finally, I'll just mention the Nusantara Awakening Party, or PKN. The PKN, quite frankly, isn't that notable of a party. more notable to make a point. The PKN was the least voted for party this latest legislative election, getting only 0.25% of the vote. Yet still, over 300,000 people voted for it, helping illustrate just how big Indonesian democracy is. So those are the parties of Indonesia. In conclusion, in the House of Representatives, there are 8 parties. The PDI-P, which is a strongly secular and populist party associated with a couple of big names in Indonesian politics. Importantly, the previous president, Jokowi. Golkar, a party made up of ex-Suharto loyalists and is a party of power and the status quo. Gerindra, a nationalist party of the new president, Prabowo. NasDem, the party of media tycoon Palu. The PKB, a moderate Islamist party based around the Nahdlatul Ulama Society. The PKS, a more devoutly Islamic and conservative party. PAN, similar to the PKB but based around the Muhammadiyah Society. And the Demokrats, based around Yudhoyono and his sons. Indonesian politics are like if the limited ideology and loyalty of Brazilian parties mixed with the Swiss model of grand coalitions across ideologies, and Malaysia's Islamic and conservative-influenced liberal democracy all combined together. Indonesian politics don't really have any good comparisons to any other country, maybe somewhat vague comparisons if you really squint your eyes, but really they're quite unique, very fascinating, and a little bit difficult to research. But hope you enjoyed, hope you learned something about Indonesian politics. But yeah, up next I will do the history of Costa Rica, then I will do Argentine parties, and then I'll kind of have a discussion about what a country is. So, thanks for listening, thanks for watching. If you want, you can email me at whydocountriesexist@gmail.com for your thoughts, comments, suggestions, or hate mail. Take care, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.